I can contextualize the problem of evil first. It's a well-known problem. It's seen as a threat to the sort of internal coherence of theistic belief. And basically, according to many religious traditions, God is conceived as being a triple O God, meaning that he's all good, all powerful, and all knowing. But the problem of evil says that, well, hold on, there's evil in this world. But if God is all good, then he would want to prevent evil. And if God is all powerful, he would have the ability to prevent evil. And if God is all knowing, he would know how to prevent evil. So it seems to be this inconsistency here, because on the one hand, you have evil, and on the one hand, you have a triple O God. And it seems like the two are in tension. Like somehow one would think that if God existed, then there would be no evil in the world. So that's sort of what the problem of evil is doing. It's showing that the existence of evil is incompatible with the existence of God. And there's different formulations of the problem of evil. There's like a logical problem of evil and an evidential problem of evil. We probably don't need to get into that today. But one of the responses to the problem of evil, or actually a response to the problem of evil, is called a theodicy. And it basically attempts to put forward reasons why the existence of God is not incompatible with the existence of evil. And many traditions, religious traditions, have their own theodicies. I'll be presenting the theodicy of the Caitanya Vaishnava tradition, or the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition, as it's sometimes called, or more commonly as the Hare Krishna movement. And the Caitanya Vaishnava theodicy, there's several steps to it, and I'll go through those steps. But at the core of it is the idea that evil is not God's fault. It's actually evil results because of the misuse of free will. So it's not that God causes suffering, it's that we have free will. And given that we have the potential to misuse our free will, and we do misuse our free will, various evils arise in the world. So, sometimes one may ask, well, couldn't God just, control us so that we would always act righteously, or control us so that we wouldn't act wrongly? And sort of a typical response is that, God can't give us free will and control our actions, because that's just logically inconsistent. It's like you can't have a square circle, because, by definition, a square can't be a circle. And by definition, a soul or a self with free will can't have its actions controlled by God. So basically, we have free will and God can't control us. And the next question is, why is this free will so important? Maybe one could say that, okay, maybe it would be better if God just didn't give us free will and controlled our actions so that we wouldn't act wrongly and there would be no evil in the world. So, what's the point of free will? Like, what benefit does it give? And the Caitanya Vaishnava response, there's sort of several reasons why free will is good. One, if we didn't have free will, we'd just be like stones or robots or something. And, at least to me, it seems pretty obvious that having free will, even with the potential of misusing it, is better than just being some stone or some robot or someone who just like can't, choose their own choices and is basically like being controlled by God, just like some sort of puppet. And another reason that free will is valuable is because it allows us to have a very meaningful loving relationship with God. Because love is something that can't be coerced or forced. It has to come spontaneously from the heart. So if God were to sort of negate our free will and cause us to love him out of force, then it wouldn't really be love. It would just be like, control or manipulation in one sense. Like sometimes there's some analogies given, like, let's say you have a partner, but your partner is just somehow like a robot, just like mechanistically and deterministically wired to, give you daffodils on Valentine's Day. It wouldn't be very meaningful because it's, they were just being forced by their nature, or, they had no other choice to give you daffodils. It's just not really something they're doing from their heart. It's just something that's being done mechanically and without much, without much love on their part. But on Valentine's Day, if your partner gives you daffodils and it's just done spontaneously, and it's not done because they have to or because they're being forced to, but they're doing it because it's a genuine outpour of their heart, then that gift of daffodils becomes far more meaningful. So free will is, with this sort of simple example, we can see why free will is valuable. When you give love freely from the heart and from the soul, then the loving relationship you have between yourself and the other person becomes more meaningful and more relishable. And the love of the relationship we have with God is basically the highest ecstasy we can experience, and it's such a pleasurable or blissful experience or relationship that it's sort of a greater good. Like, even though there's some evil that results from us having free will, ultimately the ability to have a loving relationship with God far outweighs any evil in the world. So that's sort of like a background to our response to the problem of evil. And then in my dissertation, I specifically focus on the theodicy of Prabhupada. He's the founder of the Hare Krishna movement. He's a great saint from India, and he traveled to America at the age of 70 to spread the teachings of Caitanya Vaishnavism. And so in my dissertation, I basically reconstruct Prabhupada's theodicy, and here and there I sort of, because there's a lot of, in the contemporary philosophical literature, there's a lot of challenges relating to the problem of evil, and Prabhupada wasn't presented with all of them, so sometimes I have to take what Prabhupada, take Prabhupada's view and sort of use a little bit of maybe my own reasoning to show how it responds to certain problems. But in Prabhupada's sort of theology, there's like a three-step process, sort of like a three-step response that he has. And the first response discusses how originally we were in, we say, the spiritual world with God, or some sort of spiritual realm with God. And this is where we were originally. And we were living there happily with God. And then for some reason or other, it's not always, basically we were in this realm, and then some of us, the ones that are in this material or physical world, decided to explore our other options. And one of those options was to come to this world. So out of, you can say, maybe like out of a curiosity, we wanted to see what life was like without God. So we came down to this world. So this is sort of the first part of the response. So we were originally with God, we were living a happy life, and we decided to try and see what it would be like to live a life separately from God. And so we basically came down to this world. And this itself is a fairly controversial topic within Caitanya Vaishnavism. I don't need to get into all the all the sort of points here, but Prabhupada refers to it as like a fall. This is where it sort of creates a little bit of controversy. It's sort of like, it's not like a literal fall in the sense that you're like in one geographic location and then you, like, your body or yourself just like moves. It's sort of like the soul is just like temporarily disassociated with God. And this is, God couldn't have prevented us from making such a choice because, as I mentioned earlier, you can't control a soul and give it free will. So part of having free will entails the possibility of using our free will and to fall down to this world. So that's sort of the first response. The first response is that we were with Krishna, with God, and we chose to come down to this world. And there's some questions as to, couldn't God just sort of, make it so we couldn't fall, or, persuade us not to come down, or, somehow arrange things so that we couldn't come down. And there's a little bit more that could be said here, but basically, I'll just mention that God can't control us and prevent us. God can't control us and prevent us from coming and give us free will. So it's not really possible for us to have. It's not really possible for God to have prevented us from coming down. And then once we're in this world, there's a second response in Prabhupada's The Odyssey, and that's the basically the law of karma. So karma is like cause and effect, what goes around comes around. And the law of karma, it's not really meant to punish us in Prabhupada's view, but it's meant to rectify us and teach us lessons. So let's say I get angry and I punch someone in the face. According to karma, I would like, because of having done that action, I would sort of merit getting punched in the face back as a consequence of that action. But the reason we get these consequences is because it teaches us lessons. So when I punch someone, I have some sort of defect in my consciousness, maybe some hatred or, a lack of sensitivity to others is one reason I do that type of thing. And when I get punched in the face, that experience of pain sort of teaches me a lesson in sensitivity. Like, having been punched, I realized, oh, wow, this is like really painful. Like, this is what people experience when this happens to them. Like, I wouldn't want anyone to experience what I've gone through. So it's these experiences we have, though they're obviously create a lot of suffering, they also teach us lessons and help us on our spiritual journey back to God. And there's lots of literatures that talk about sort of how suffering builds character. There's Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, which is a very popular book. It discusses how he was a prisoner in these concentration camps during World War II. And even though he witnessed like tremendous suffering, he discusses how these moments of suffering were able to teach him lessons and get a new vantage point on life and sort of help build his character in meaningful ways. And yeah, I think, I don't know, even in my life and in many people others' lives, we can see that, there's some difficult circumstances that we go through, and at the time it's very tragic for us. But as we reflect on it in hindsight, we can see that like these sort of painful experiences actually taught us lessons and are ultimately for our betterment, even if we don't realize it at the time. So the laws of karma are basically there to teach us lessons and guide us back towards God. And another point about suffering is, so according to like the Caitanya Vaishnava theology, and this borrows from other Hindu philosophies also, there's this notion of a samskara, or an impression. So everything you sort of experience leaves an impression on what's called the subtle body. So we have a physical body, which is, the body you see in the mirror. We have a soul. And then aside from that, we also have what's called the subtle body. So it's like it's subtle in the sense that you can't like see it or smell it or feel it within, you can't perceive it with your physical senses. But it's like a psychic body. It comprises our mind, intelligence, and sense of egotism. And as we reincarnate throughout various bodies, the subtle body also accompanies the soul. And anytime we have an experience, it leaves an impression on this subtle body. And all of our manners and dispositions that are sort of in our subtle body are the product of different impressions that we've acquired. So, maybe when you're young, you have certain experiences, and those experiences leave impressions. And then even when you grow up to be much older, those experiences play a major role in shaping your character. So because of the subtle body and these impressions, as we go throughout, different bodies in this world, we keep on acquiring these impressions, and these impressions eventually mold and shape our character to be more sensitive towards others and more attuned to God. And then, so that's the second response, is the law of karma. And then the third response is that, so one feature of our theology is that if you perform what we call devotional service, you perform acts of devotion towards God, then God can actually override the sort of karmic, we say like merits or demerits you have, and sort of wipe them clear and make it so you don't have any more karma to experience. But at the same time, Prabhupada calls it, he says you may get like token reactions, meaning you may get some sort of minimized version of the karmic reactions you were supposed to experience. So if you, I don't know, if you like killed someone in a past life, and maybe it would have been your karma to have been killed yourself, but because you performed devotional service, now maybe instead of getting killed, you'll just get sort of, I don't know, like slapped in the face or something. You get a minimized version of what you were supposed to have experienced. And the reason we have these types of token reactions, you can say, is also because Krishna or God wants to teach us various lessons. And basically, when you become a devotee of God, he's sort of personally overseeing your life and personally organizing the events in your life. So when you take to devotional service and you suffer, it's not because of your karma at that point. It's because God is personally organizing events in your life to teach you various lessons. So in the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is one of our scriptural texts, there's various verses that highlight this motif. So one is in the 10th book. It's a famous verse. Basically, it says that when Krishna favors someone, he'll actually take their possessions away and leave them in a state where they're sort of, they're sort of rejected by their friends and relatives, and they're in this really helpless position. And in this helpless position, out of their sense of helplessness, they actually learn to turn towards God more intensely. They make friends and keep company with other saintly people, and they further their spiritual progress by being in a position where they're just sort of helpless and dependent on God. Now, of course, that doesn't happen to everyone. Some people take to devotional service and become more rich, but the point it illustrates is that when you become a devotee of God, God is personally organizing the events in your life so that you can become more devoted to him. And sometimes moments of suffering put us in a position where we're sort of, we sort of learn to see that God is our sole refuge, and we learn to intensify our devotion and call out to him more intensely. And also we find in another part of the Srimad Bhagavatam, there's this great devotee named Queen Kunti, and she actually prays that, Queen Kunti underwent a lot of tribulations, trials and tribulations in her life. And at the end of it, she's basically saying, give me more and more of these trials and tribulations, because when I have these tribulations, I can think of you more intensely. So that's obviously a very high stage. I don't recommend most people to pray like that, but it illustrates the fact that when you're in times of distress, you can call out to God more intensely, and this furthers your devotion to God and is ultimately better for you in the long run, because you can awaken or reawaken your love for God more quickly. So that's basically the three-part process. First is that we were with God, staying with him, and we chose to leave God to come down to this world out of, a sense of curiosity. The second is that when we're in this world is structured by karmic laws, and these laws are such that we get corresponding reactions for our activities. And aside from that, if you're a devotee of God, God will personally orchestrate various events of suffering in your life so that you can learn the lessons that you need to, so that you can intensify your love for him and then ultimately go back to that spiritual world that we came from. So that's sort of it in a nutshell. There's more points that can be discussed. There's some common objections to karma, like, how can we experience for things that we don't have memory of? Or, there's sort of objections and challenges like that, but maybe I'll leave it up for some Q&A at this point.
Thank you very much, Adi Purusa. Very interesting and very concise. Thank you for the presentation. And I already saw that Rupa Vilas has raised his hand for a question. Welcome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the first question that comes to my mind, because you didn't really talk much about what evil is even. I mean, it seems like we haven't really got a definition of evil.
Oh,
And
okay.
it'd be good
Yeah.
to know what we mean when we say something is evil or not evil.
Yeah, that's a good question. That would have been good to mention. So usually, at least people that put the problem of evil forward, they sort of have in mind like specific events, sort of tragic events. So like I mean, I don't know, events like tsunamis that kill thousands of people, or events like tragic events like wars or famines, or I think they have in mind like tangible events that cause suffering to people. Within our tradition, I think there is like a meaningful distinction between terms like suffering, pain, and evil. So I take pain to be like physical pain, like you're in physical pain, and suffering to be sort of like a mental state of distress. And you can experience suffering without pain. Like, let's say you're a college student and you get an F on one of your tests. You don't experience physical pain, but you suffer because you're experiencing some sort of mental distress. Or if you're like a very strong person and you experience pain, you might not necessarily suffer because your body is so resilient. And evil, you can be in this, you can be in a tragic situation, and if you have the right mindset, you can basically sort of be peaceful within, even though your external circumstances are sort of bad and tragic. So there's like a meaningful distinction between these three terms that can be drawn, but I sort of take evil, or at least the way that most people who are putting forward the problem of evil are defining evil as just sort of some tragic event that in general causes someone to suffer. Yeah.
Rupa Vilas?
I just want to give you, I heard Stephen Fry give an argument once, and I just want to see how you would respond to it. He gave the example of people that live along the Nile River in Egypt, these children especially who bathe in the waters. There's some kind of microbe or organism, some kind of thing in the water itself that gets into their eyes and causes them to go blind. So his argument is, what in the world, it's the usual. I mean, I'm sure you've heard variations of the same argument, but he got very furious even talking about it, saying that what kind of God would allow something like this to happen? So nasty and so horrible. And the children, and of course he sees the children as as innocent. So I just be curious to see how you respond to these type of scenarios.
Yeah, that's why I think the problem of evil is difficult to respond to if you don't have some notion of like reincarnation. Because something like child suffering is very hard to account for if this life is our first life in this world, or just the fact that we're born in unequal circumstances is difficult to account for. Like, some people are born in very fortunate circumstances, wealthy families, they have all their needs taken care of. Some people are in really bad circumstances. I mean, it's a difficult, it's a problematic. I see why it's a problem for him. But when you have the idea, when you accept the idea of reincarnation, you realize that before these children were in their present body, they were in some other body before, several bodies before. And in one of these bodies, maybe they did something sort of violent to someone else. And because of that violent action they did in the past, or because of some action they did in the past, now after, however many lifetimes, now that they're in this present body, they're getting reaction to something that they've done in some other life. So that would be sort of one response. I mean, one point that's sort of important to note about karma is that sort of one critique against karma is that it can lead to like a victim blaming mentality. It's like, oh, those people are suffering because it's their karma. If you sort of look at, if you use karma as an excuse to just like justify other people's suffering, then it can become, you can weaponize karma. So we should be compassionate and realize, we should still be compassionate to such people, but from one perspective, we can see that, okay, like somehow they must have done something in the past, and what they're experiencing now, despite it being really sort of painful and causing a lot of suffering, is somehow working to teach them a lesson that will be beneficial for them down the road, even if it's not apparent now. I saw another hand go up.
Jagatpal, did you have your hand up just now? You're on mute, by the way.
The law of karma gives an answer to why evil occurs.
Mm-hmm.
So evil occurs as a reaction for an action, in a nutshell.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But doesn't that suggest that whoever controls the law of karma
Mm-hmm.
is a vindictive person? He operates on the platform an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, I think is.
Yeah.
Because because it just is still dishing evil out. The person who controls karma is dishing evil out in the form of microbe that kills a child. What we just established by that is that he's doing it is dishing evil out for a reason, as a form of punishment, of reaction, following the principle of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth.
Mm-hmm.
But that still remains an evil act, an informed, evil act.
Yeah, so that's why, at least in Prabhupada's view, these, so one model is like retributive justice, like an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. But if that's all justice is about, is just getting revenge or retribution, then it's not a very good judicial model. But in Prabhupada's view, while there is a sense of that you get what you deserve, it's also not just intended just for the sake of punishment, or just for the sake of getting even, or just for the sake of revenge or retribution, but there's this element of like moral purification built into it. So it's a little bit different, because it's not just that it's eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. I mean, while that sense of proportionality is there, like you get what you sow, what you reap, or you reap what you sow. I mean,
yeah,
it's not evil in the sense that whatever is happening to you is not just happening just for the sake of punishment itself, but it's happening for the sake of teaching you lessons or reforming your moral character in some manner. So it's almost like a form of tough love, I guess. It's, these experiences can be quite painful, but there's a lesson behind it, and there's some way in which it's working for your betterment, even if it's not apparent now. By teaching the lessons, or teaching to be more sensitive, or somehow building your character in some meaningful way. It's
interesting. I was going to ask something following up from Jagapalna's point as well, but I saw Ramananda had his hand up. So Ramananda, you go first, because I think you're asking something.
No, please, continue the flow.
No,
I'll go after.
No, it's okay. Go ahead.
We could do this all night, couldn't we? No, you. Okay, you put yourself on mute, so I will. Thank you. My question is, I guess it's a little bit of, I have this feeling of something. What is it? Maybe a little bit of anxiety, in the sense that, could it be said that if I was totally free and God didn't want to control me, he wouldn't try to reform me? By using any means, including karma. He would just let me run wild. So it seems, I'm questioning, is there a balance of reformation, but also he can't help but try and help? which isn't, is that in a way kind of contradicting my free will?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I guess in one sense, you're never being like forced to reform yourself. I mean, you get these experiences, and how you respond to them is up to you. You can have an experience and sort of be stubborn and sort of like, I got punched, but like I'm just going to keep doing it. You can, how you respond to it is still up to you. But at least the opportunity is there, and eventually, given repeated opportunities, eventually you can start to learn of your own free will. I don't know. I'm trying to think of maybe a good analogy. Like, I don't know, like a parent might try to teach their child a lesson, but they can't like force the lesson on their child. They just keep on giving them guidance or keep on giving them opportunities to learn. But when and if that child learns is sort of on them. So in one sense, we're not really being forced to learn these lessons. We're sort of given opportunities, and these opportunities are conducive for us to learn the truth on ourselves. But it's never a matter of force. But it still raises a question, like, why are we in a world that's structured by karmic laws? Like, why didn't God make this world like a hedonistic paradise or something where there was no karma? Yeah, that's another sort of good response. I would say that, well, if this world was like a hedonistic paradise, then we would basically have no reason to want to leave, and we'd stay here, and for the rest of our lives, we'd miss out on the opportunity of having a loving relationship with God. And if God were to orchestrate such a situation, that would sort of be a fault on his part, because he's placing us in a situation where we'd basically be failing to realize our highest good for all of eternity potentially. So that's one good response to that. And I think the law of karma it's interesting too, because I think it's like a fair it's like a fair system. Like, if you don't want to suffer, then you can choose to have your actions, you can choose to act in a way that you don't get suffering. Like, the law of karma is it's sort of it's not like anything's ever being forced on you with the law of karma. Like, you basically get what you deserve. I think in my view, that's about as fair of a sort of situation as you can get, because it's not like you're ever being forced to suffer. Everything that you experience is in part due to your actions. And if you want to be free from suffering, then you can just act in a sort of righteous way and not have to experience anything negative. That sort of, it's up to you. You can choose to do that if you want. You can choose to act righteously. Yeah, another question.
Is it okay if I just quickly follow on? Thank you. Yes, Sankarshan. Thank you, Adi Purusa. That was you made a point at the end, and it made me wonder. Who am I to try and understand God's intentions? But is it conceivable that God has layers of intentions, just like I do? And certainly Reformation is there, but you brought up the word fairness, and I guess that links into justice. And I'm just, I guess I'm questioning, could it be the case that actually, fairness is high up there on the list? Like, how are we just gonna, we want, these guys all want to do what they want to do. But they're all going to go mad if I stick them all together and they all try and be like mini gods. It's going to go mental. So, like, just to make it fair for each of them, because they each want to be mini gods, then I have to do something. Otherwise, I think that hedonistic paradise would quickly turn nasty. And I actually think it'd be a great system for trying to go back to Godhead, because I think it would go mad. I want to get out of there, but I don't know. I can't say.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah. It's hard to know all of God's intentions for sure, but one thing is that God doesn't favor one soul or self over the other, so he's impartial in that sense. And I think you're getting at a good point. Like, creating a system like one that has the law of karma is sort of ensures that like no self or no soul is sort of being like beaten down because they weren't able to amass the most power. Or it's sort of when you have the law of karma, it creates a situation where it sort of evens the playing field, so that no one soul has like power that they can use to abuse others. It creates a fair and just system so that everyone has sort of equal opportunity, and no one is sort of in a situation where they're going to be sort of arbitrarily oppressed or something like that. Yes,
Thank you.
Sankarshan.
Thank you, Prabhu. Something that Jagapalana Prabhu raised, it really picked out something that I was thinking about in a different way. But the way he raised it, it kind of highlighted something that I wanted to ask.
Mm-hmm.
One part of the reason why the problem of evil seems so troublesome, I think, is the idea that many people who are experiencing these karmic reactions seem like people who don't need to learn that lesson. They already seem to be in a state where they understand like murder or rape or something is wrong, and yet they experience it at a point in their journey where they are no longer trying to perpetuate those kinds of crimes. So it feels like they have already been rehabilitated in some sense, number one. And in that situation, you wonder why God wouldn't forgive. Because in other traditions, I understand forgiveness to be a far higher focus for the divine than justice. I understand many traditions as really focusing in on forgiveness, the forgiveness feature of God. But the karmic response seems very, in a sense, harsh because it doesn't give room for forgiveness in that sense. And in fact, it dispenses, as Jagapalana said, it dishes out punishment, even in cases where it seems people have learned their lesson. How do you think we can deal with that kind of tension?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think one, so as I sort of mentioned, God can sort of eliminate your karmic merits and demerits. So he's ready to forgive. The question is, are we ready to turn to him? You know, if we turn to him, we just chant his name once, he's ready to wipe everything clear. The question is, are we ready to turn to him? And, you know, if a soul has the desire that, you know, they just don't want to turn towards God, then God respects our free will. And he's like, okay, like if you turn to me, I can wipe out all your karma. But if you don't want my intervention, then I'll respect your free will. I'll let you be under the laws of karma. So there's a sense in which God is ready to forgive, but we have to make that effort to approach him. And as for the other point about, you know, why do people get reactions? They seem like they're learning their lessons. At least one thing you learn on the spiritual path is that there's these things we call anarthas. They're like sort of moral imperfections like lust, anger, greed, you know, madness, envy, these types of nasty things in our heart that we want to get rid of. One thing you learn is that these are really deep rooted in the heart. So, you know, I may not have, they lessen over time, sure. Like some people have less degrees of these anarthas than others, like sure. But they're really firmly entrenched in the heart. And even someone, you know, who on the surface, they, you know, they're a righteous person, they, you know, they don't do any sort of sinful activities, they're sort of a good person. They may not have these anarthas to a large degree, like they may not have the anarthas to the same extent that like a serial killer has these anarthas or imperfections, but maybe there's like something, you know, some tinge there. Like, you know, I think all of us, unless we're absolutely pure souls, we have sort of traces or, you know, degrees of these anarthas still left in our heart. I mean, I can say I have experienced that the process of bhakti is very purifying, and I've noticed these anarthas have certainly been decreased over time, but I can see that there's still, you know, some traces here and there. And in those cases, you know, maybe they've learned their lesson and they've learned that it's hard to murder people or, you know, kill people. But maybe there's some sort of traces of anger or, you know, straight hatred in their heart. And it might be slight, sure, but maybe there's something there. When you experience sort of heavy experience, you know, whatever traces are there can get removed. Even if, you know, even if you've learned the lesson that it's wrong to kill, still, having a heavy experience might help you lessen some of the sort of like more subtler and you know, finer anarthas in your heart, the ones that are still residing there. Yeah, I think Jagat Palana has another question. Oh, I think you're muted, Prabhu.
You're on mute, Prabhu.
Yeah, I am. Sorry. When I was preaching in India, and discussing this issue, many times I've been presented with this argument of this explanation of the problem. And that is that this world and everything that that is happening is a lila of the Lord. Is a play of the Lord.
Yeah, that's
and to give scriptural reference,
by Vedanta Sutra.
No, they give a scriptural reference, the story of Jagai and Madai, the story of Jai and Vijay, the story of Hiranyakashipu. Because on the subject of evil, they are the archetypal evil people. They are the greatest evil, never been a person more evil than Hiranyakashipu. And who is Hiranyakashipu? Hiranyakashipu is Jai. And what has Jai done to become Hiranyakashipu? Basically nothing. So really Jai became Hiranyakashipu to help the Lord have some fun.
Yeah, so sort of our condition like Jai, that we're like Alila, is that sort of what you're getting at, or? Yeah,
that's what I'm getting. That's how that's how many Indians explain this to me. That we're just part of a Lila of the Lord.
Yeah, I guess you can sort of view it from one perspective like that. Although in the case of Jai and Vijay, they had a desire to descend as Hiranyakashipu and Ravan and Kumbhakarna and Shishupal and all that, because they wanted to give the Lord pleasure by fighting. I think in our case, maybe there's some among us who have desires like this, but I think in our case, our intentions were a little bit different. But you can find in scripture that this everything that God does is a pastime, and this world in itself is like a type of pastime. You can say, we come to this world, and then it's like a pastime that God redeems us and brings us back to Him. You can sort of view it from an angle like that. I think that response to someone who's putting the problem of evil forward, and if maybe they come from like a certain context, maybe that sort of answer is sort of satisfying for them. I don't know. I think in sort of a lot of people that put forth the problem of evil, they might, if they're coming from like a Western background and they're not accustomed to the idea of Leela, maybe they might find that a little bit more difficult to accept. But from one angle, you can sort of see things kind of like that. This world is like a Leela, like we come here and God sort of redeems us, and it's this Leela, even when He comes down as Lord Caitanya Mahaprabhu to sort of save the fallen souls.
Thank you.
I think
thank you.
Last is a question.
Yeah, I remember years ago there was a hospital in Vrindavan, CFC. It was a Christian. I think it had been organized by a branch of Christianity, and I remember talking to one of the doctors there, and he gave me the Christian argument. They said that India has been ruined by this idea of karma, because they said, because their attitude is, if someone's suffering, it's their fault, so nothing to do with me. It's too bad, but nothing to do with me, so let them suffer. That's what's meant to happen. So it seems like their accusation was, where is the compassion? That these people are suffering, and we should try to do something. If I could add something, to add something to it, there's a story also about Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, who some beggars who were very skinny and hungry were begging for food, and his disciples were kind of waving them away, like, you're just causing a disturbance, get out of the way. And so Bhaktisiddhanta began lecturing that this, if you don't even have the inclination to give to people that are actually hungry, then how will you have any inclination to serve in a loving way Krishna?
Mm-hmm.
So I was just thinking, about that, but about that doctor though, his argument was that the law of karma gives an excuse to ignore the suffering of others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. I think one thing that's good to note is that in there's sort of Caitanya Vaishnava theology, there's many doctrines in our theology. Karma is just one of those doctrines. There's other doctrines or points that are important too, like the development of compassion. We find in the Srimad Bhagavatam, there's a story of Ranti Dev, and he was fasting for like 48 days, and he's about to break his fast, and I was fasting for 48 days. I'd be ready to just like go and eat and like finally eat something, but he's fasting for 48 days, and then a guest comes to his house, and he gives him whatever food he has, and then another guest comes and he gives the rest of his food, and then another guest comes, he gives him something like water, and he just like keeps on giving what he has. Like he's so selfless that even though he's like starving, he's just like so selfless and willing to cater to the needs of others because he has just like so much compassion. Then at one point in that narrative, he says like, I just want to, he's like, I don't even want perfection. I don't want my own liberation. I don't want any mystic powers. I just want to like relieve everyone of their suffering. He had so much compassion. We find Vasudev Dutt in Chaitanya's pastimes. He's just like, he wanted to take the sins of everyone on his head so that they could all be freed and go back to Godhead while he sort of suffers their karma. Like we find some immense compassion in our scriptures. So while we have the law of karma, we shouldn't just like view karma in isolation. We should look at our theology holistically and see that while the notion of karma is there, like there's far, far, far more emphasis on developing compassion and working to help others and trying to, just spontaneously help others and relieve them of their suffering. I think if you sort of look at karma in isolation and just focus on that, it can be harmful. But if you look at everything and you have a mature understanding and you really imbibe the mood of compassion, then this sort of, you wouldn't want to just see someone and think, oh, he's suffering because of their karma. You would think, oh, he's suffering, I should help him. Like the compassion sort of overrides these sort of intellectual considerations of, oh, he's suffering because of his karma.
Just wanted to say thank you. Good answer.
Oh, thank you. I see a couple hands up.
I was going to ask a question, but Rashma just notified me that Ramananda had his hand up first.
I keep beating you to the mark tonight, Sankarsana.
I guess it's my karma.
Okay, I'll be compassionate. Do you want to go first?
I think it's my karma. Anyway, I was going to say it's my karma to go first as well, but no. I'll let you go.
Actually, it's linked to my question. I'm considering that Adi Purusa, like if I can understand from what you've mentioned that if someone chants the name of God once or approaches God, then their karma's quite clean, and God will kind of organize, look into the karma, maybe throw a few things in here and there to kind of help them to become fully purified so they can return. My question is, if someone's not doing that, but they're doing good deeds in terms of humanitarian work, they're trying to help people on a physical level, is that potentially actually a disfavor, if that's the word, to the person, because they won't get what they need, the medicine, if you see what I mean? Is it postponing the medicine, or does it have any I guess, will it be of benefit to I guess I'm confused, because maybe there's a positive thing that the person's doing. Do they get good karma? And then the other person who's supposed to get the kind of bad karma but is being prevented because the other person's done a good thing, is it just postponed for them?
Well, I guess we're all individuals, and it's hard to say, like, maybe at times, like some relief, like some good thing happening to us might sort of be the type of thing we need at that point. it's hard to say, what will help us at any one point. And that's also why, like, you can say that, well, suffering is good, so why don't we just cause people to suffer? Why don't we just go around doing bad things and, they'll suffer or they'll benefit. I think like the reason things like that wouldn't make sense is because, only God knows like what type of happiness and what type of distress will be best for someone at a certain time. Maybe for someone like they have suffered a lot and they need some sort of good thing to happen to them to get like a mental relief and to, learn appreciation and stuff. So that's why like all the good things and bad things are sort of, we're destined to experience them because of our karma, and God is arranging for us to experience them in the way that is best for us at any given point. And then because of that, when we're helping people, humanitarian work, in one sense, we're just instruments of the sort of we're just instruments of their karma in one sense. Like if we're doing good for someone, they were sort of destined to have that good thing happen to them, and we're sort of the instrument for that to happen. There's a question of whether karma de-incentivizes humanitarian action, because what we're doing to people, they're sort of destined to experience what they're destined to experience. So there's sort of the question of what's our role to play in this, or are we sort of adding to anything? That's one question, but I think when we, humanitarian work, it's sort of, you're sort of being an instrument, I guess, for things that would have transpired of their own accord. That's how I would view it.
Thanks.
Yeah, Sankarshan, and then.
It was good I let Ramananda. Well, it was good that Ramananda went first there, because your response kind of leads into the question I had.
Mm-hmm.
This model of karma, one problem that it seems to be grappling with is this idea that you just touched on, this deterministic aspect to karma. And the particular aspect of it that I want to touch on here, different to what you just raised, is the idea that we seem to be incurring karma off the back of being conditioned by a certain previous karma. So we've acted in a way in the past that places us in a psychophysical nature right now that is then generating further karma, and we are being held to account for that. And that seems a little unfair, because it feels like there are certain things that are now instinctive to me, that it's only because of a conditioning. It's not really that I'm choosing it. It's almost like my karma has kind of pushed me to that.
Yeah.
And yet I'm being blamed for it.
Yeah, so that's sort of like the argument from fatalism. Karma shapes us to act in certain ways, and those ways cause us to act in certain ways. And at a certain point, we're just helpless because we're acting according to our dispositions. So there's a number of responses to that. One is, if we take to devotional service, then these dispositions that we've acquired from our karma, these impressions and all these dispositions, can sort of be eliminated, because God's name is purifying, and devotional service to God purifies us and removes these dispositions. That's one response. Another response is these karmic reactions, they're not just negative. Like there's also a positive element. So part of these dispositions we could acquire could be to shape ourselves in like positive manners. So we get a karmic reaction, it causes us to have a certain disposition. But even though there's some sort of element of like, we're sort of like, our nature is being sort of determined by these karmic consequences. It doesn't necessarily have to be bad. Like these karmic consequences could cause us to develop like good character. And I don't see that being as problematic. And another point is that, so I get a little bit more into like the nature of free will in my dissertation. I didn't have a chance to talk about it here, but basically, there is a sense in which this world has certain forces that cause us to act in certain ways, like the gunas, for example. The modes of nature, goodness, passion, ignorance, depending on which modes we interact with, it sort of conditions and influences our psychology in certain ways. But even though there's these deterministic forces in this world, one thing we always have free control over is what we choose to interact with. So the world is such that if I'm in an environment where I'm around drunkards or murderers or thieves, like they'll have a certain influence on my psychology. But I have the freedom to choose my environment. So I could choose to be around more uplifting people. I could choose to be, in like an environment of saints or something. I have that choice to choose what I interact with. So even though our nature might be sort of influenced in certain ways as time goes on, we at least always have the ability to choose what we interact with. So, I may do some actions, get some karma, it might influence my psychology, but, even though my psychology may be influenced in certain directions, it doesn't take away my ability to choose my environment and be able to put myself in a situation where I can combat those tendencies and choose sort of a higher path. So there's, a few responses to that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Rupa Vilas?
Yeah, I'm sort of back still with the Christian doctor, but but I was also thinking about Bhaktisiddhanta's response to his disciples. These disciples are confronted with a person or persons that were hungry.
Mm-hmm.
And they couldn't think of anything else but food.
Mm.
And so if the response to that type of suffering is to provide food, so that those same people may then say, oh, these people who are spiritual, they helped me with my difficulty, so maybe I should become more interested in what they're up to.
Mm.
It seems to me that pious behavior, or behavior that you could consider to be under the modes of nature, can have a very positive effect in that sense, that if a spiritual person is helpful in a material sense, then the people experiencing that will think, well, these people are special. They're kind of wonderful, really. And then maybe they'll take an interest. So I think that it's not that, because Sankarshan, if I understood you correctly, you were saying that even once we're in the path of devotional service, we're still behaving in a conditioned way. And is that incurring more karma? My understanding is no. It's not incurring more karma. If we've taken up devotional service seriously, we may still be impelled, like what does Prabhupada calls it, momentum. He gives that example of the fan. The fan's turning. Once the plug is pulled out, it's still turning, but it's winding down. It's simply momentum. So I would say the purifying power of practice of Krishna consciousness is the thing that's taking you out of that conditioning and out of that sort of mentality. It may take some time, but it's working. I don't know. It's just some thoughts.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think anything that's done for the sake of like pleasing Krishna is not an activity under the modes of nature, even though externally it may resemble certain things. Because when we're acting for Krishna and we're doing devotional service, those actions become spiritualized and they're no longer under the influence of the modes of nature. And actually, this actually sort of raises an interesting point that when you understand karma, you sort of understand that the highest welfare activity is to educate someone spiritually and allow them to sort of strive to transform themselves morally and spiritually. It's nice to do welfare activities and humanitarian activities, but karma sort of, when you have an understanding of it, you start to realize that the best thing you can do to someone is allow them to learn to help themselves and to, teach them to act morally and righteously. And I think that sort of gives us an impetus as devotees to try to educate people, give them spiritual knowledge, bring them to the path of Krishna consciousness so that they can purify their heart and ultimately learn to sort of be in a position where they're acting righteously and not having to experience suffering on account of their misguided actions. Sort of gives you an impetus to help others in a spiritual way by sort of bringing them to God and to teach them spiritual lessons and give them spiritual knowledge.
Thank you. I thought I saw Jagapalna have a stand up. Jagapalna, bro.
Yeah, first of all, before I forget, I would like to congratulate you for what for me is the most thoughtful, pinpoint, precise utilization of terminology accuracy in as far as the proper utilization of terminology for the way I perceive things. For example, I'll give you an example of it. You use the word, you describe this as sometimes as theology, sometimes as doctrine. For me, it was significant that and you never used the word philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
You might have used it, I missed it, but I didn't notice you ever using the word philosophy. And as an accuracy of describing the subject matter, which to me is unprecedented. I never heard this before in my life from a devotee. This clear understanding of the division, for me, is a sign that it's very clear in your mind what is what. I don't know if you have any comments on this, but I'll be very interested because it's something that really interests me. Besides, I had another point I wanted to ask. Is in relation to that?
Yeah, you go ahead.
Okay, so because in relation to this, if you allow me, if you gave like a doctrinal like explanation or an explanation for the point of the doctrine, an informed, reasonable doctrine or theological explanation. I'm making a very, I cannot be as accurate as you are, so I'm bringing the level down of accuracy. But is there a philosophical explanation of this problem? And if there is, would this philosophical explanation look like?
Okay, so yeah, as for the first point, I have to thank my doctoral advisor. He's very precise, and working with him, he really grills you to make sure you're using precise terminology. That's sort of one benefit of getting postgraduate education. You're trained in precision. Actually, the way I see theology and the way I see philosophy is this. So I see philosophy as like reasoning based on, logic and reasoning and, observations about the natural world also factors into philosophy. I see theology as basically being philosophy, but with the addition that you accept the sacrality of certain scriptural texts as sort of like truth. Like, I think theology, it does the same types of things philosophy does. It uses reasoning. It uses, it's very logical and, you use reasoning, but it just goes the extra step of accepting certain texts as being like divinely inspired, and it accepts the authority of scriptural texts. But other than that, both theology and philosophy both use reasoning, they use logic, they can draw upon experiences of this world. Even in our tradition, like we have three pramanas or means of acquiring knowledge. We have scriptural testimony, logic, and we have sense perception. And it's not that we just accept scripture. We interpret scripture and we apply scripture on the basis of reasoning. So I think the sort of our philosophical response is sort of embedded in our theological response. We have a theology, it lays out certain things, and the philosophical aspect of it comes from taking these teachings and using reasoning to sort of apply them or to defend them or to, basically to draw upon these doctrines that we accept on the basis of scripture, and then use reasoning to show how they can provide a comprehensive and compelling response to evil. So to do theology well, you have to be able to do philosophy well, because reasoning and logic, these things can't be divorced from theology.
Can I just a small follow-up, a little challenge?
Yeah.
If you don't mind.
Yeah.
Have you just formulated an argument that I heard a lot from, we can call Western philosophers or two-core philosophers, that Indians, the Vedic tradition is not a philosophical tradition, really. It's a theological tradition. So these great acharyas, Ramanuja, Madhvacharya, even Shankaracharya, they're great theologians, not philosophers, for the reason that you just expressed, because they refer to the text and so on and so forth.
Yeah. So I think that in itself is like a complicated question. Like, is there even an Indian philosophy? I would say that, in one sense, they are theologians, but if you read like the Sri Bhashya, for example, like Ramanuja's like philosophical reasoning is just like unparalleled. I mean, he's like, yes, he's drawing upon scripture, but some of his critiques of like Advaita Vedanta, for example, are just like on the basis of like logic and reasoning. So I mean, yes, in Indian context, in your context of India, like the people doing philosophy or theologians, but I think like even if you study, you can see like there's so much philosophical competence that these thinkers have. And even in the West, up until a certain point, I mean, theology and philosophy were not so separated as they were. It's only, I mean, not so recent, but when the Enlightenment came is when the separation came a little bit more pronounced. And I mean, also, it's sort of like a mischaracterization to say that there's no philosophy in India. I mean, in classical Indian philosophy, you have like Nyaya and Buddhist debates, and the Nayakas are like it's heavily philosophical. A lot of their debates are highly philosophical. Granted, Vedanta is a little bit more theologically oriented, but if you study the works, you can see like there's a lot of philosophical reasoning going on that's sort of there in addition to just the theological aspect.
If I'm allowed just a brief remark, otherwise,
yeah.
Can I?
Yeah.
You mentioned Ramanuja. This was also very, very significant to me because I go around saying for a while now that I consider Ramanuja's presentation of Vaishnavism in Ishribas and so forth the most strictly adhering to philosophical. I would say his Vishishta Dvaita, I consider to be the most philosophical bearing in mind the strict rules of philosophy, the most stringent philosophical presentation of the absolute truth. Do you have any thought on that?
Yeah, I would agree. Like you read Ramanujan, it's like, wow, like philosophical presentation is like unparalleled. Actually, it's also interesting. David Hume in Western philosophy is credited with sort of dismantling or dealing with design arguments. There's this famous arguments against like intelligent design, or William Paley's watchmaker analogy. Although I think Hume was actually Paley was after. But actually, Ramanuja in his time, which would be like 11th, 12th century, actually had the same philosophical arguments against the design argument that David Hume had. He's like several hundred years before David Hume, and he's having these same sort of arguments. So it's sort of a testament to, there's definitely philosophy in India, and just sort of underappreciated or not so recognized. I mean, the same critiques, even more sophisticated, even better presented in Ramanuja's work than in someone as David Hume, who's so respected. Of course, there's a reason why he's sort of critiquing design arguments. It's not that he's against he's critiquing the idea that we can know God just simply through reason and independent of scripture, but that's sort of another topic.
Thank you, and congratulations again.
Oh, thank you.
I salute you again for your presentation. It was brilliant.
Oh, thank you.
Absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, it was a wonderful presentation, and you covered quite a lot of ground in that short space of time.
Yeah, that was good. Sometimes these things can be like just debates and things. It's like kind of like rapid fire, like boom, 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 and you're still like, okay, gotta fire back. It's good. I enjoy these things. There's good points we've raised. I think it's very productive discussion.
Great, thank you. And for those who wanted to check out Adi Purusa in those YouTube clips, I think Ramananda shared one in the chat. But Adi, you said there was a few others. There's a few others as well.
Yeah, there's a couple I've done with this Christian named Seth Hart. There's a couple of those, and there's one I did with James Fodor. Those are the three best ones, I would say. Okay. Maybe when you're posting this online, I can find those, send you the link, and you can put it in the description.
Yeah, that'd be great. That'd be great.
If you could send it through to Reshma, we'll make sure and add that there.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'll do that. If I somehow forget, just send me a reminder. I can send that.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Adi. And thanks to everyone for joining in and all the great questions we had.